Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Anne and I'm the consultant at the Digital Transformation Hub, a part of the InfoExchange group with Connecting Up. The Hub focuses on digital technology as an enabler to support service transformation and new ways of working, assisting nonprofits on a broader digital transformation journey. Before we begin, we'll start with a bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, so if you have any technical issue, please type it into the chat box on your webinar panel and I can assist you. If you have any question during the session, please also type in the chat box and Maurice and I will answer them by the end of the webinar. We really encourage you to ask as many questions as you think of throughout the session to make this as interactive a session as possible. No question is too silly. If you're on a Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the audio and video of the webinar. If possible, please close all other programs to help you have the best experience. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and a link to the recording and the slides will be sent to you as soon as we can after the webinar ends. Before we start, I'll also remind you that there will be a short survey at the end of the webinar. Today, I'm excited to welcome you to Cybersecurity 101. Do you know how to keep your organization secure with Maurice? Hi, Maurice.
Hi, Anne. Thank you very much for that introduction. And welcome everyone to this webinar on Cybersecurity 101 with essentials to keep your organization secure. So we're running this as a 30-minute session with approximately 20 minutes of content and time for questions and answers at the end. Feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go and we'll get to them. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm on today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So today's webinar will cover a view of current cyber threats facing organizations, the top 5 things all not-for-profit staff must know to keep their organization's data safe, some high-level overview of imperative measures organizations need to have in place, some resources with links, and then questions and answers. So as I said, please put your questions in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. Information security practices are no longer a nice to have. Given the increasing nature of our digital footprint and increasing threats, we must build security resilience into our organizations. Security has been in the headlines every month with a number of organizations across all sectors of the economy being affected. A view of some of the headlines within the community services sector as well as government from the past year are on this slide. On the top left, Oxfam had donor information of over 1 million Australians disclosed via a data breach when a database was accessed by a security incident. On the right, in March last year, the incident involved a caseworker who worked at a community services organization and had access to an IT system provided by the Department of Health and Human Services. After leaving the position, his access to the system was not revoked, and he then accessed confidential information related to children and committed sex offences. On the bottom left, Uniting Care Queensland had an attack on some of its IT systems and had to resort to using manual workarounds because IT systems were not available. And on the right there, on the bottom, an incident experienced by Uniting Communities in South Australia where staff were unable to access certain systems due to a cyber incident. Again, this would have required manual workarounds and change in business process. Some more on the top there, linked to the MySA.gov IT system where individual accounts were accessed via stolen password credentials. This was possible because people had used the same password across online IT systems. And when one of these systems has been compromised and passwords obtained, the same passwords gave access to their MySA.gov accounts and hence details such as driver's license numbers, which are a key piece of identity information. And on the bottom left, this is from this year, the Australian Red Cross indicates that clients were potentially caught up in a cyber attack where a database of the parent organization, the International Committee of the Red Cross, was compromised and personal information of people who had sought services for loved ones was available compromised. And on the right there, recently with the Russia and Ukraine tensions, there's been warnings from the Australian government for organizations to adopt an enhanced security posture. While some organizations may not be targeted directly, they could be caught up in attempts to compromise other Australian targets. So as you can see, the impacts of cyber incidents can vary. In some cases, data is locked up and inaccessible due to what is known as ransomware. In other cases, personal information is disclosed via a data breach and could have ramifications for individuals. Here are some fairly recent statistics on scams and cybercrime in Australia. The data points are important to review as they highlight what's going on in the landscape. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, the ACCC, points out that it's very common for scammers to utilize current events and crises to make their scams appear more legitimate. We saw this in 2020, where scammers used the bushfire emergency and then the COVID-19 pandemic as a basis for new scams. We're also seeing some of that now with the Russia-Ukraine war and crisis, where organizations are attempting to raise money for, for various needs in Ukraine, and there are scammers who are taking advantage of that and setting up fake scams. So some statistics there with the loss of over $850 million in 2020 to scams. And on the right, a statistic from the Australian Cybersecurity Centre from the recent cyber threat report notes that over the 2020-2021 financial year, there were over 67,500 cybercrime reports, and this equates to one cybercrime report every 8 minutes. These increasing events in our headlines and statistics on cybercrime are indeed a call to action for organizations to review their cybersecurity practices. A key message is that the human element is significant in the delivery of security in today's organizations. The human element is that people component. For example, for staff to be aware of certain processes on how to securely share information or how to use technology securely by creating a strong password. Security behaviors and the culture and sentiment on security within an organization are greatly influenced by you and your perception of risk. And most importantly, these perceptions can be changed. Security is everyone's responsibility. Before we get into the content on the top 5 things to keep your organization's data safe, I wanted to make reference to Safer Internet Day. Safer Internet Day, which ran last month on the 8th of February, is a global initiative, and in Australia, the eSafety Commissioner provides a range of resources to raise awareness about online safety within families, organizations, and schools. So I encourage you to visit the eSafety website for more information, and the link is within the resource section as well at the end of this slide pack. Let's get into the top 5 things you must know to keep your organization's data safe. The first is know how to spot a phishing email. Phishing emails are sent with the aim of tricking the recipient into clicking on links, opening attachments, or giving up their personal information. So in this slide here, we have an example of a phishing email. A staff member received this email about messages that could not be delivered to their Office 365 mailbox. Now, if you look at the time, this was sent quite early in the morning, 6:26 on a Tuesday morning. It might have been one of the first emails they saw when they opened their mailbox that day. They clicked on the review button and they, entered in their password and they clicked login. Now, fortunately, in this case, multi-factor authentication was employed and the account access was blocked. So multi-factor authentication is that additional code that you should enter to access an IT system in addition to your password. So we still ask the staff member to change their password nonetheless. But this is an example of a phishing email where an attempt to obtain access into an organization's Office 365 environment is done. Now, if you look at the email for some of the telltale signs, you can see the from address as a .de extension, a .de suffix. Wasn't anything to do with our organization. The link as well here, it does look suspect with all the foreign characters in it and doesn't seem to have anything related to Office 365 or SharePoint or anything like that. Here's another example of a real life phishing email, which is an example of what is called business email compromise. So an email request was received by a payroll department appearing to be from a staff member requesting a change of bank details. So the payroll department responded requesting the new bank details and not noticing the from address. On the bottom there is the second email which was received by payroll, at which point, due to the grammar in the email, they realized that this request was not legitimate. So again, if you look at the from email address, directoronly.com, it was nothing to do with the organization and the organization's email domain. So business email compromise, as I mentioned, is a method that's used to attempt to divert funds. It could be via, in this instance, pretending to be a staff member and you've changed your bank details. It could be pretending to be a supplier and you've got a new invoice, or you've changed your bank details and you want your payments made into a different account. So it's one that's been on the rise over the last financial year or so, and one to look out for. Another one here, this was received December last year and has an attachment. Here's a large outstanding amount of US dollars, 107,000. Again, if you look at the from address, it's a .de extension. Are you dealing with a supplier who's overseas and would have an address like that? And also this one had an attachment. So clicking on an attachment in a phishing email could result in malware being downloaded onto your machine. Not necessarily that you click on a link and give up your username and password, but in this case, you could have malware which would compromise your machine and potentially your organization's network. So this is a useful poster which highlights the general attributes of a phishing email and some of the ones that we just saw, the examples. Note that not all these may apply, as phishing emails can have different intents. So the attacker with phishing uses social engineering principles to trick the person into performing an action. So these principles may be a sense of urgency or scarcity. And if we look at this example here, we can see that the messages are, you're eligible for a tax refund. That's always a good thing. So it'd be really enticing, to click on the link or open up the attachment that you can see there in the email. However, important to pause and take note of the signs in the email. So you can see that this comes from atogov.com. That's not, a valid Australian government address. The generic greetings, dear taxpayer, grammar, or spelling, which are, quite may not always be easy to spot, but one that has been shown to be telltale of phishing emails. Urgent calls to action, strange links, as we saw previously. So while this poster references what to watch out for in emails received, the same technique is used to get people into clicking on things and giving up information via phone calls, text messages, and also via messages received through various apps. So these other means are also prevalent, not just email. So it's important to be aware of whatever you're asked to click on and open, regardless of the technology that's in use for this. Now we have a poll with 2 questions along the topic of can you spot a fish? These are taken from the ACCC Scam Watch quiz. This is the first question. You received this email from MyGov asking you to verify your identity. What would you do? So we'll give everyone some time to review this and think about which of the 2 responses that you see at the bottom there you would select. We'll then have a poll up, and please select one of the 2 options that will be on the poll. So we'll just give everybody a few seconds to look at that, and then Anne will put the poll up. Thank you, Anne. Thanks, Anne. We have the poll up now. So just pick which of the 2 options you would select. Okay, I think that should be good, Anne. We got responses?
Yeah.
Okay.
80% voted.
Okay.
So a few final seconds to vote. Now I will show the result.
Okay, great. We've got delete the email, it's a scam, and everybody voted that. Well done. The Australian government will never ask you to follow a link in an email or SMS to verify your identity. Another sign that this is a scam is the sender's email address. no reply at aussie.com. A government agency would always have an address in .gov, .au. Another way to check would be to hover over the link here, which we can't do. This is an image, but hover over the link and see where the address takes you, carefully checking that it would be a .gov website. This is the second question for Paul. Your boss sends you this email. What should you do? So again, we'll give everybody some time to look over and pick which of the two options below you would select. Okay, thanks, Anne. If we could have the poll up now. Okay, are we good? Okay, great. Yes, again, everybody is correct. Well done. Ignore the email and contact IT. This is not your boss. The sender's address would be, is different from your manager's email address. If you look carefully, not easy to spot, but it's a different font with the letter I in the word services. And that's sometimes, a technique that's used to spoof, in a way, email addresses with that alternate font there. So you'd let your manager and your IT team know that there's been a scam attempt. And good practice is always to check when asked to release funds. So I mentioned business email compromise before. This is another potential way that funds are compromised. So always pick up the phone and ask your boss the question, even if it's, do it ASAP. It's better to confirm these things before acting on them because they are quite common in terms of scams that are used. Okay, that covers off phishing. The second point is protecting important and sensitive information. A number of data breaches happen due to human error and people not storing or sharing information securely. So information is a key asset of an organization and it has value, so it must be protected. And this is particularly true for sensitive information such as health data and client records. So if within your organization you collect information considered confidential or sensitive by certain industry standards or laws, you must take reasonable measures to protect it. And for personal information, this may be only collecting the information you need for a particular purpose, ensuring that sensitive data such as health data and client records are stored in a client and case management system or a system that has appropriate protections, and also ensuring there's awareness among your staff and volunteers as to where it should be stored, how it's to be handled and communicated, and so on. And if your organization has not made it clear, then you should ask the question. Also ensuring that data is stored in the correct place so that it can be backed up in the event that you experience an incident where your data is not accessible. You can always recover it from a backup. So it's important to store it in the correct places. The third point is on using good password practices. So a good password may be based on a phrase that you know. You could compose the password by picking out the first letters of each word, capitalize some and add in some digits. You may also hear the term passphrase, which is 4 or more random words strung together to make a password. It's important to keep your personal details out of it. And it's also really important not to reuse passwords, because if a password is compromised from one system and it's been reused on another, it's easy for an attacker to get into the system. And we saw this with the security headlines of the MySA Gov system. If you need to write passwords down, store them securely, not on post-it notes on your screen, for example. And if you have too many passwords to remember, consider a good password manager. Another really good practice, and one that's shown to reduce the occurrence of breaches or incidents, is the use of multi-factor authentication. Now that's the practice of using a password and another factor to log into an account. Now, some examples of MFA or multi-factor applications are on the slide here. There's Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, which are apps that you can get on a smartphone. Another practice as far as passwords is that it's best not to share IT system accounts and hence the passwords. But understandably, if this is not always possible, if you have volunteers within your groups, make sure that you have practices around sharing the accounts. So you share the password securely, just with those who need to know it. If somebody who knows the password leaves and it's a password that has access to information considered sensitive, change the password. So if that's how you can get around the use of shared accounts, make sure you have those other practices in place to manage the security of the account and hence the data within a system that the account provides access to. The fourth of the top 5 is to keep your device secure. This is in a physical sense, as well as securing the software on your device. Physically protected when you travel and carry your device. Lock your screen when you step away from your device, as in this case, any information you have open is also protected and the access to your device is also protected. It's important to keep your devices up to date. So that would be your operating system, whether you have automatic updates or the process used by your organization, and applications such as web browsers as well. And also not using software that's not permitted by your organization on your organizational device. At this time, some people are still working remotely. If your PC is used by your children, be aware of what they do on the PC. Sometimes installing games or going onto websites where there are games can have malicious software installed on your device. So be aware of what others who are using your device are doing on there. And if within your own organization, you're allowed to use your own device, be clear on what type of information you can store on there and ensure the device has appropriate security controls. And some examples are here: using a PIN or passcode or fingerprint, depending on the device that you have, making sure that you have security updates and potentially remote wipe capability as well in the event you lose the device and you need to make sure that your data is removed from it. And lastly, report anything you're not sure about or seems suspect. So security incidents are adverse events which pose a threat to an organization's information systems and services, and they can stem from a variety of sources. So unfamiliar activity on your device, information being disclosed to an unauthorized person, a lost device, whether it's a laptop or removable media such as a USB stick that has your organization's information, or unescorted people on your office premises, maybe not so relevant at the moment with many people still working remotely, but these are some of the examples of security incidents. And ensure you know who to report potential security incidents or just something you're not sure about or worried about at your organizations. If you see something, say something. The Australian Cybersecurity Centre has expanded its 24-hour call centre capabilities to benefit small and medium-sized organizations. This is a useful resource to have. If you're not sure about something from a security perspective, you could check with them too. So some of the key takeaways: the first 3 are important for you to know, and the last 4 in gray font are what your organization should have in place. Security is a shared responsibility among staff in an organization, so it's important to work together to keep the organization resilient against cyber threats. So we spoke about strong passwords, being aware of phishing emails, and remembering that fraudsters can create fake websites or spoof emails and pretend to be suppliers or staff members and change bank account details. The last 4, as I mentioned, ask the question in your organization if you're not sure as to where certain types of information should be stored, the use of multi-factor authentication on critical IT systems, understanding your policies and what your organization expects of you, and also know who to speak to if you need to report something from a security perspective or if you're not sure about something. Here's a listing of some useful resources, some references from the Digital Transformation Hub. The cybersecurity related links on here are a good reference as well, with Safer Internet Day. The ACSC, the Australian Cybersecurity Centre website, also has a range of personal security measure guides that you can use. And there's also a phishing quiz on there as well that you can access for free. Have I Been Pawned, which is the 4th last point there, is a website run by an Australian cybersecurity researcher, Troy Hunt. You can check there if your personal details have been compromised in a data breach and take steps to change passwords, for example. The last one there, not particularly relevant to cybersecurity, but Microsoft training options are also available via the Digital Transformation Hub. Okay, thank you. That ends the content, and happy for questions and discussion.
Thank you, Maurice. I have a question from Erin. What is the best
Yeah.
password keeper to use?
Password keeper, your password manager. There's a few good ones out there. Through Connecting Up, there's one available called Dashlane. It's a product that's available to not-for-profits, so it would be at a discounted price. You could check that out via Connecting Up. The other ones that I'm aware of are LastPass, 1Password. I suppose the key thing to look for in a password manager is to make sure that you can have multi-factor authentication, because if it's going to store all your passwords, you should have a strong password to access it, as well as the additional factor.
Thank you, Maurice. Yeah, please feel free to add in more questions or respond to Maurice's reply. I have a new question here. If I'm using my own device for work, are there any specific risks associated with that, and how can I manage those?
Yeah, if you're using your own device. So we covered that off briefly when we spoke about device security. So I think the first thing to be clear on is what your organization expects you to store on your own device versus in certain systems. So be clear on where particularly sensitive information should be stored. Are you permitted to store it on your device, or should you be storing it within a cloud system like Microsoft 365 or Google or another IT system? The other thing is to make sure that you have updates that are applied. So that's updates to your operating system, updates to your web browsers, because oftentimes these have vulnerabilities that can be compromised if for any reason you're browsing the internet and happen to click on a link that has malware associated with it. You could have malware installed on your device. So making sure that you have the updates applied, understanding the expectations from your organization as to what information can be stored on your device, or where you should be storing certain information so it's protected, it's backed up, it's accessed securely, and so on. And as I mentioned as well, if it's your own device, you may have other people within your home environment who are also using it. Be clear as to what they can and cannot do. If you've got maybe work applications that are installed on there, ensure that there's an understanding that certain things are for work and they should not be accessed, and also maintaining the element of confidentiality. If there's information that needs to be confidential and not shared with others, just to be clear about that.
I have the next questions. What do we do if someone clicks on a suspect link in an email?
Yeah, so if you have a link in an email, it could be, as we went through with the exercises in phishing, it could be a link that's asking you to provide your password, so as to be able to compromise your system. So in that case, it's really important. The first thing you would do is change your password. And having multi-factor authentication, as we saw with the phishing email example, is really key to protecting your account. So first thing I would do, if it's your account details that have been provided via a link, change your password. The other thing to note is sometimes you click on a link, you might have malware installed. So let your IT team or your IT support provider know. They would run a scan on your machine, check access logs to check that there's no suspect activity that's on your account. Maybe check your antivirus logs. So making sure, and that's another point, make sure you've got a good antivirus installed, as well as the point we touched on previously, keeping your systems up to date, because if you have vulnerabilities, they can be compromised when you install certain types of software via a link that might be malware, for example.
Thank you, Maurice. Anyone has to have any question, we'll wait for a few other seconds until before we end the sessions. Yeah, if we no longer have any questions, or if you still have any question after this webinar, please feel free to fill in the survey right after this, or email us, and then I'll send the slide and the recording of this webinar as soon as we're ready after the webinar. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you, Maurice.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.